Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. It is our great pleasure to welcome WHW, 3/4 of it at least, who managed to come this time. And it has been our great pleasure and honor to co-curate and co-conceive with the exhibition that will open tomorrow at Para Site, where I hope that everybody will be coming tomorrow from 7 to 9. The exhibition Golden Heights Estate is part of a larger framework called Meeting Points number 7, this being the 7th edition of this framework. Which is a series of exhibitions taking place in different cities and different institutions over a period of time. It started last September, I believe, and it will go on in a few other cities for a few months after the opening tomorrow. So I think what they will do tonight would be to give a bit of background about themselves and about their some of their previous projects, and then more specifically about the work that they did in the framework of Meeting Points, and from there, I guess, somehow arriving to what you will see tomorrow. And if they don't arrive there, then you can just fill in the gaps yourselves from what they mentioned today. So let me just introduce them properly. WHW is a curatorial collective, as you can tell, formed in 1999, and they're based in Zagreb and Berlin. And they organize a production and exhibition and publishing projects, and they also direct Galeria Nova in Zagreb. And they are currently working on a long-term collaboration project, beginning as well as we can. How do we talk about fascism? And they're also curating the large-scale exhibition, really useful knowledge, that is about to open at the Museo Nacional Centro de Arte Reina Sofía in Madrid in October. So I would just like to thank you, AAA, for hosting us now as a weekly habit, almost. So without further ado, I would invite our dear colleagues to start their presentation.
Thank you, Cosmin, and thank you everyone at Para Site for having us, and also thank you Asia Archive once again for hosting us. So Cosmin did a bit of introduction already, so I will then skip part of mine, but just to go back tiny bit in the past, we will not talk that much about our previous projects, but we will concentrate more on Meeting Points. But before we do, we just want to kind of sketch a little bit our local situation, because this is also something which kind of keeps shaping our curatorial work, and also is always kind of the starting point for all the projects that we do. So we started working together in Zagreb, in Croatia, in the post-war situation, so after the breakup of Yugoslavia. And this was the atmosphere of heavy post-war still nationalism, xenophobia, and also complete amnesia about socialism and communism, which were connected to the past of Yugoslavia, which kind of the right-wing government completely wanted to forget and suppress. And we got together on the exhibition, and you see the cover of the catalog here, which was done on the occasion of 152nd anniversary of Communist Manifesto, and we wanted to claim kind of a generational right to start from a different position, and to claim the right to talk about these histories and see what we can learn from them, and in which way we can fight this kind of atmosphere, which is of course absolutely unacceptable politically. And we did this exhibition, which was of course in that time very provocative in Croatian context, to do anything on the occasion of Communist Manifesto, which was something not to be mentioned. And in finding our ways how to somehow deal with the heaviness of the topic, we decided to focus it on the issue of economy, which was very much shaping, we believe, both the war and the post-war realities, and also the realities of everywhere, and then of course Croatia included then. And this is why we chose these three questions: what, how, and for whom. which we then also use as a title of our collective, because we believe that somehow these are also the questions which are concerned with any cultural production. And also the idea is to start to try every time when we start doing something to ask them anew, so not to claim any kind of set answers to them, but trying to find ways how we can rethink them each time. As Cosmin already mentioned, from 2003 we are also running a small city-owned gallery in Zagreb, which is called Gallery Nova. It's a non-profit space, and it has kind of a big history because it was, as an institution, it was started already in 1975. And since Yugoslavia was not part of the Eastern Bloc, this was also reflected in the position of art production and culture, which also meant that already from the late 60s, different kind of experiments in contemporary art and conceptual art practices started really early, and this gallery was also one of the places where the generation of then young artists, people some that you might know like Mladen Stilinović or Goran Trbuljak or Sanja Iveković, were also showing some of their first projects. And also one part of the gallery history which was important for us is that they were also kind of trying to find ways how to approach some things in the more distant past and connect it to the younger generations, which is also something we've been trying to do there. And we always use the gallery as almost kind of a headquarter, I would say, for our international projects. So they're always also somehow visible in the program of the gallery. Right now, in fact, we are struggling with it heavily because in the atmosphere of deep economic crisis, which is hitting Croatia also, and with complete acceptance of like neoliberal strategies as the only option, there is a huge threat of gallery being privatized, space sold, and things like that. So we are trying right now to try ways to somehow influence the cultural policies to accept the history of this institution and find ways to, kind of maintain and just to be sure that its future also continues. So as I already mentioned, this local context and also now its normalization, because last summer Croatia joined European Union. Our joke is that we kind of joined as we are coming to the party at 5 a.m. when everybody is already drunk and leaving, but still Croatia is not taking it as that, but it's kind of very celebratory, but still we feel that, just as this example with the gallery shows, what we are really witnessing is a certain normalization of a value system, but on the other hand, all the processes of the post-war situation that I was mentioning, meaning still heavy nationalism, problems with ethnic minorities, but also more than everything, very corrupted privatization, because Yugoslavia had all either state or society, ownership, which is now basically being privatized, destroyed, and also all the resources are kind of collapsing. And this is in a way something which is still, I would say, very much a starting point for approaching the project, and that this is also how we started with meeting points in Zagreb last September, as Cosmin mentioned. So just super briefly on the history of meeting points, it started in 2004. And it was started by Egyptian curator Tarek Abu El Fattouh, who is also still the artistic director of the festival. And in a way, when he got the idea to do this project, it was really focused on the production in the Arab world. And he was concerned with the fact that a lot of production happening there is in fact because of different geopolitical dynamics and problems in different times, is not really communicating between the states. So a lot of work, being produced in Egypt is never shown in Lebanon. So in a way, when he started, he wanted to try to find ways how to connect these artists and show the works in different cities. Meeting Points is organized by Young Arab Theatre Fund. So at the beginning, it had quite a strong emphasis on theater, also performances and bits of visual art. And then this was changing with time. So in 2007, for the first time, he invited someone else to curate the project. And that was, in fact, a Belgian theater curator, Free Lysen, who co-curated it with Maha Mamoun, who is the Egyptian artist, also one of the artists in the show, and who I believe is also doing the talk next week. So you will get the chance to hear from her a little bit. And then the 6th edition of Meeting Points was curated by WHW, who moved it more a bit into the direction of visual arts. And also he was the first one to kind of be faced with the question how to do a project which is supposed to be focused on the Arab world and connected with all the political intensities that were happening here. And we got invited to do it in 2012. And back then, everything that was happening in the Middle East still felt, I would say, maybe more optimistic than now. And also all the movements around Occupy and protests around capitalist system and so on kind of felt connected to it. So one of the first decisions that we made is that we didn't want to do anymore a project which would in any way represent the art production in the Arab world, or even represent any movements or thinking connected to the Arab world, but try to do something which would much more be interested in certain issue, how to connect this as an international project and make dialogues in different directions, because we felt the topics that were coming out of so-called Arab Spring were extremely relevant. This is not images we were supposed to see, were very relevant from like different corners of the world. And this is why we decided to kind of change the structure, both in terms of participating artists, but also in terms of where the project will be taking place. So in previous editions, it was really also mostly the cities of the Middle East, and we wanted to kind of, you know, like make this geography much wider. And this is also why it was important. Also, one of the things we had to fight was, of course, that in 2012 there was quite a lot of interest from, let's say, more stable or rich European institutions to, you know, take something and then insist on this focus on the Arab world and so on, which we wanted to avoid. But we really wanted partners who were interested in, you know, kind of hosting the project and be in dialogue with us and rethinking it. So this is why it was also really precious for us that Para Site team kind of really entered into this dialogue and that we did this exhibition together. So also the, let's say, switch we did in terms of the whole project structure, because it used to have this more, I would say, maybe focus on different type of events because of this strong performance and theater emphasis. We really turned it into a series of exhibitions. And for us it felt, and we in a way insist on that in our curatorial work, that exhibition is a space of possibility where both kind of intimate and intense encounters can happen. So here we wanted to see how we can make this exhibition in a way be in dialogue with each other without turning into, let's say, kind of a, you know, a traveling show or anything like that. So in each city we in a way try to kind of find local links, but in a way also find dialogues with previous and future chapters. So the project started in Zagreb last autumn, as we already mentioned. Then it traveled to Museum Muhka in Antwerp. Recently, a few weeks ago, it opened at Contemporary Image Foundation in Cairo. And then after Para Site, we still have 3 more stations to go. One is Beirut Art Center in Beirut, and then the 21st House, which is a space in Vienna, which used to be a museum of modern art before the big Leopold Museum opened. And both in Muhka and there, we are also trying to work in dialogue in museum collections, which is again another nice challenge to try to see in which way everything that we are trying to think about is connected to certain historical experiences. And the last station, which is kind of an especially intense context, is in Moscow. And we are doing this in collaboration with Victoria Foundation and Institute for African Studies. It's a quite amazing institution. I'm a little bit still under impression because I was there to visit them last week. It was one of the most prominent institutes for African studies in 60s and 70s, and they were really practically involved in liberation struggles in Africa. And right now, also to connect it to the Croatian context, Putin is in a way trying to restructure the Russian Academy of Science, which is in fact the first step in cancelling it, because it was such a huge institution which had more like than 100,000 people employed, but also it has loads of real estate. And of course now they're trying to introduce agencies which would take care of the real estate, sell it, fire people. I mean, you can imagine the rest of the story, unfortunately, probably very easily. So the last bit of meeting points will happen in the institute, which is right now still, like functioning on this, I would say, quite grand scale in a huge palazzo in central Moscow. So as I already mentioned, the exhibitions try to be in dialogue with each other, so it's not any kind of linear, strict chapters, but it's more different kind of echoes and resonances, which we hope that someone who would see them all can follow through them. All the exhibitions do have the same starting point, let's say, which was the book written in 1961, Wretched of the Earth, by philosopher, psychiatrist and revolutionary Frantz Fanon. He wrote the book somehow most inspired by the Algerian Revolution, in which he was also taking part. And as you probably all know, The Wretched of the Earth is coming from the first line of Internationale, the world workers movement song. And Fanon is also quite known because of his other books connected to, let's say, colonial struggle, and sometimes he's also very much used in post-colonial theory. But we especially wanted to kind of rethink this book, Wretched of the Earth, because we felt that the issues he's discussing there are very much connected to the political protests and also political protests that we are interested in right now. So we took like the overall title of Meeting Points, and the Hong Kong station has its own, but like overall title is 10,000 wiles and 100,000 tricks. And Fanon is mentioning this in a particular chapter when he's talking about the way that people who were involved in anti-colonial struggle suddenly become the keepers of the post-colonial order, and he's curious how this gets organized. And so this was one of the moments, question of political organization, which we felt was very interesting, thinking about also what is happening in the Arab world now, because we feel that somehow this lack of a political organization which would kind of continue the emancipatory values which were discussed within the revolution protest is one of the biggest challenges and problems which are happening in all the countries there. The other questions that Fanon is also addressing in this book is the role of violence in revolutionary process, and also he is a really kind of unforgiving and very strict criticizer of nationalism, which we were also very interested in. And the last bit which was very inspirational was the issue of the subject of class struggle, and Fanon is here talking a lot about the ways how lumpen proletariat and the ones who really don't have anything are the ones who should also be, considered when thinking about what would be the kind of a political organization coming out after the revolutionary process itself. And this was also something which was, of course, very much connected to the kind of problems that are happening in the Arab world, where in a way you would get from the villages and from people who are really without any political power this very conservative vote. And there was this strong kind of emphasis on Islamist parties, which were in a way, got the majorities after the revolutions, which was, I would say, quite disappointing for a lot of people involved in them. So I would say that this framework of Fanon's thinking, which I tried to briefly shape, was absolutely not, let's say, kind of a direct topic. It was more, let's say, something which was shaping the starting points we were trying to discuss. And what Anna and Ivet will do now is use, let's say, examples of works and kind of structures of the exhibitions we did so far to tell you a little bit how we approached some of these topics through different works.
Is it working yet? You have to hold it closer. Okay. So as for the exhibition in Hong Kong, we wanted to invoke the question of the middle class and what is the role of the middle class in the contemporary processes, especially also including us as cultural workers, as artists, as curators. And the questions that prompted us were how to understand the role of middle class within the class struggles that we are witnessing today, as much as it has been denied. The class struggle in all the dominant discourses. Despite the fact that there is the declining difference between the countries, but increasing and growing the differences within the countries themselves, with an exception of Latin America. So there is less difference between, let's say, Croatia and Hong Kong than it was maybe 20 years ago, but the differences between the classes are getting stronger. So our question was, what is the role of middle class within all of this? Especially related to the Arab Spring and what was the role of the middle class in the whole uprising in the Middle East, and whether this middle class is in fact today functioning as a guardian of social order and guardian of status quo, or maybe as a vanguard of democratic change and of changes of the system. As such, the conversations that we had with the team from Para Site about the context in Hong Kong and changing the name of the exhibition into the Golden Heights estate was really important for us also to look at these questions from this very local perspective. The whole project started in Zagreb in September last year, and the exhibition featured female artists. And we also wanted to do it as a symbolic gesture, to have an exhibition that is opening a festival, that is working around the Middle East and what is going on in the Middle East with a group of female artists. And to question these things, the issues of class, political oppression, role of revolution, through a specific gender perspective. The artists that we show there were Philippa Cesar, Imanisa, whom you will also see in the exhibition, Maha Mamoun work you will see in the exhibition here in Para Site, Raj Kamal Kalon, but not necessarily always the works of all the artists are the same throughout, but the works also change from exhibition to exhibition. Then we also showed Kaifata, the booklet that was created by initiative Kaifata and Hatam al-Radani called How to Disappear, and Jumana Mana, another work that you will see in Para Site. You can see the big man, the drawing is by Raj Kamal Kalon that we showed in Zagreb, and these are the works, the posters that we showed, one of which is here at the Para Site. What we also wanted to do in Zagreb is open up a discussion. We can leave it here. No, we can leave it. We also wanted to open the whole festival and the whole process for a series of discussions and talks. So we organized, and to open up the whole question and the string of issues that the festival is discussing through the series of talks and discussions and lectures. The first one was by Maha Mamoun, who did a screening of Kianu Shayari and Tony Chakar. Tony Chakar, it's a video that actually you could see here also as a part of the program organized by Para Site. It was called To Speak Mountless. And the film by Kianu Shayari was, sorry, it was not Ayari, it was Abbas Kiarostami. The first case, second case. And it is the film that was filmed immediately or at the height of the Iranian Revolution, where the group of students are asked, or there is a case study that explores whether, with a group of students, whether they would tell on a student that committed kind of a misbehavior during the class. So whether they would tell on him and avoid the collective punishment, or they would stay like in solidarity, and that just have like a collective punishment for all of them. So it's a question about solidarity and how do you form your own collective body. It was also the film that Despite featuring many of the prominent political figures of that time, like Minister of Education, was forbidden immediately after it was screened for the first time and was not seen for several decades. And Maha wanted to use this juxtaposition of the film that is dealing with the question of the political situation in Syria at the moment and the situation at the height of Iranian revolution to actually question what can be pronounced and what can be said at a certain moment, and what has to be unnamed or untalked about, and when do you in fact make a decision to speak out. Other things that we did during this very opening of was to have a lecture by Filipa Cezar. That was a lecture about her research into the Guinean militant filmmaking, and it's a long-term project. And then we did like a panel discussion with several feminist activists of the younger generation that was called Sketches for New Feminism, where we wanted to talk about the new reconfiguration of feminism that is taking into account, again, more class issues than focusing on the identity politics, and in which way does this figure out in contemporary Croatia. So we invited a number of young feminists that are dealing with the workers, mostly from textile factories that are losing jobs in the last several years. And as a last event, we had a performance by Sanja Ivejković called Why an Artist Cannot Represent a Nation, which was a performance developed by Sanja Ivejković in collaboration with the theorist and the philosopher Rada Ivejković. It was, as you can see already from the title, questioning the representation, especially within the artistic and cultural system. And in this performance, the feminist activists, also workers' activists, gay rights activists were reading the text written by Rada Ivejković, while the choreographer and the performer and dancer Sandra Banić-Naumovski was translating it to the language of the sign language. At the same time, there was a video behind the flag, the video with the flag on different parts of the city and paysages. Then the exhibition in Cairo. We collaborated with, was in a similar way done as a collaboration, so as here in Para Site, we collaborated with the Contemporary Image Collective. We again included a number of feminist artists where we wanted to question the issue of representation, again, national, racial, ethnic, through gender perspective. And again, as in Zagreb, feminism was not proposed as a concept to discuss the contemporary plight of women or the contemporary plight of women in Arab world only, but more to talk about feminism as a device to understand contemporary and new class struggles. And again, it was the work that very much, there were a number of the works. Unfortunately, I have only this one photo from Sanja Ivejković, where she juxtaposes the images that she found in the photo editorial of The Face that were published on a very unfortunate month, which was September of 2001, in fact. So they coincided with the attacks on the World Trade Center. You can see on the right, obviously, these are the super beautiful photo models and the warriors/terrorists fashion here. And she juxtaposes these images with photos that she finds in the mainstream Western media, like Der Spiegel or, I don't know, Economy or different media. And then she actually questions the notion of how do we form the image of the terrorist in the contemporary media today. And again, there were some of the works that questioned contemporary violence, like Raj Kamal Kalon, who you will also be able to see in the exhibition here. Then the works that are dealing with a middle class, many of whom are represented in one or different way here in Para Site, like Jumana Mana again, or Mahamamoon. And the works that are dealing with the question of the revolutionary process and the role of revolutionary, like Imana Isa. Now to go to the exhibition that was that was the biggest one, and will definitely be also the biggest one, I think, in this line of the exhibition, was the exhibition that we did in October in Muka, in Antwerp. We did an exhibition that had a number of works that we selected for this particular occasion, like new productions or older works, but also we worked with the Muka collection and selected a number of works there, which we thought was important. This exhibition wanted to start from, when we started preparing it, it was already a year ago. As Sabina said, it was, at that time, the question of the Arab Revolution was still already kind of starting to decline, but still much more optimistic outcome or overview you could look at it, which you could look at it. And we wanted to look at this question of Arab Spring protests and how they reflect us throughout Europe. And what are the reverberations of these protests throughout the world? And what is this tension and this constant like pulling in different directions between them as kind of new political movements without a hierarchical leadership, with different kinds of political organizations, with different kinds of mobilization of the public body, and on the same time in which way they're also pulling to the other direction towards the counter-revolution, towards the even worse follow not only conservative backlash, but complete, like ethnic conflict or the reversal of these processes. So, to start talking about the topics, I would actually like to show a couple of minutes of the work by documentary filmmaker from Russia, Artavazd Pelesyan. The work was done in 1967, and it's called Nachalo, beginning. It was... It was commissioned. Sorry, now something. Yes, it was commissioned on the 50th anniversary of the. Yeah, I will just say a few more words and then I will say like, don't worry, it's okay. It was commissioned on the 50th anniversary of the Russian Revolution. And it's composed of the series of the archival footage and also of the artistic material, like for example Eisenstein's October or Alexander Dovzhen's Earth from the 30th or Pudovsky's Storm over Asia. And it's also includes a really beautiful soundtrack that is a constructivist soundtrack, Time Forward by Fyodor Svidov. And it has a narration that goes from the anti-Tsarist movement to revolutionary civil war, the death of Lenin, industrialization at the times of Stalin, then the rise of fascism, Second World War and the nuclear war, and then anti-colonial protest and student movements in the West in the 60s. We won't see all, but let's do a few minutes. very much about the masses of the movement, the collective body. And it's very powerful and it has a very strong, aggressive soundtrack. But this was one antipode of the exhibition. And then many of the works were dealing with a whole different, more individual and more melancholic approach to and more contemplative mood and approach to the revolution or the way it influences and affects our life. One example, so to juxtapose it and to show how the exhibition was built, next to Peleshian, very close to it, was a work by Sharon Hayes. I march in the Parade of Liberty, but as long as I love you, I am not free, from 2007 and 2008. The work that was created at the height of the Iraq War, where she talks about the personal feelings and love addresses in the context of this conflict. I will also play just like the very beginning of this. It's a soundbite.
My dear lover, I'm taking to the streets to speak with you because there seems to be no other way to get through. Why don't you call me? Why won't you send me some word? To give you a picture of where I am, I'm standing on the corner of Prince Street and Bowery. I'm speaking into a megaphone. It's Saturday, December 1st. Today is World AIDS Day. I need to speak to you, my love, of your life and of mine, of our past and our future, of sweet things that have turned to bitterness, and of bitter things that still could be turned to joy. You refuse to answer my messages, my letters, my phone calls, but I know that the ears are the only orifice that can't be closed.
So Sharon is using private speech to enact the promises and disappointments of collective political action. And there was a lot of works in the exhibition that actually centered around the notion of sound, of listening, of who speaks and who listens and how do you listen and what do you actually hear and in which way the political speech is actually formulated, pronounced and heard. One of the works that also dealt with this question is a work by Lawrence Abu Hamdan, which is that was audiovisual installation language Gulf, that is basically dealing with a Druzi community on the border of Syria and Lebanon, in an area controlled by actually Israel, where they are in a valley called Shouting Valley, shouting to each other to hear. So the family members that are actually divided by border are shouting to each other so that they can hear each other. I will also play just a few minutes of this video, which was, this part of the video was shot on the protests during the also anniversary of Nakba, when actually the people reached the border.
Of, more of an odious.
بسكنهم هذا الحيز بين سوريا وإسرائيل وفلسطين يعقد الدروز الفصل المكاني الحاسم. إذا أنصتنا عن قرب للخط الحدودي الصوتي الذي ينتجه هذا المجتمع عبر الوطني، يمكننا أن نسمع في وقت واحد المتعاون والخائن، المترجم والمتعدي. كيف حالك يا بي يا فادي؟ كيف الجامعة؟ الحمد لله. قل يا بي العرس راح يتم في ميعاده؟ طبعا بي حكيت مع بناتي ومعاكم الناس في دمشق. انتوا جايين على بلادي. بس انا مش راح اقدر اجي معهم. في يوم 15 ايار 2011 استضاف وادي الصراخ نوعا مختلفا من الخلق عندما اجتمع المتظاهرون على جانبي الخط الحدودي في ذكرى النكبة. ولكن على غير ما هو معتاد في لقاءات هذا الوادي، هذه المرة لم يكن فقط الصوت هو ما سيعبر الخط الحدودي. اخترق 150 متظاهر فلسطيني الخط الحدودي من سوريا إلى المناطق الإسرائيلية بشكل غير متوقع. تم قتل 4 متظاهرين برصاص الجنود الإسرائيليين، ولكن بالرغم من هذا تمكن غالبيتهم، وإن كان بمجرد فترة قصيرة، من ممارسة حقهم في العودة. بينما نوصل للخط الحدودي وهو يخترق بدنيا، نسمع أصوات فرقة الاستقلال الجزئية وهي تختفي وراء الضجيج.
And one more word that dealt with a question of listening and sound. And also with listening and sound, but also with the question of Palestine and the role of the colonialism in forming the situation in the Middle East today was work by Tom Nicholson and Andrew Byrne entitled Comparative Monuments, Palestine from 2012, where, which was actually built around the 9 monuments that were built throughout Australia to the Australian soldiers that were killed in Palestine during the First World War. He created Tom created a series of posters that are takeaway posters that are talking about this situation in which way British Empire actually was affecting at the same time Australia and the Palestinian and their futures up until today. And together with Andrew Byrne, he created the soundtrack that was played in the installation. I will play only just a brief end of the soundtrack.
Palestine, 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 Palestine.
No more video for the sound. So this is how Sharon is actually looking in the space. This is Lawrence's installation and work by Paul Dević, which says people with the dancers. This is something that's on. But it's okay. Is it okay here? No. They're not. Somehow they're suddenly cropped.
Yes, okay.
Sorry.
Restart it. Hopefully, it will be in about 4 minutes.
Yes. Okay. So this is Lawrence with Paul Dević, and this is how Tom Nicholson's and Andrew Burr in the installation look in space, with the posters that were takeaway and then the soundtrack.
Hi, I will continue this virtual tour through the exhibition in Muhka in Antwerp. We played those videos and sound pieces because sound, like a physical presence, was a very important aspect we tried to actually accentuate in the exhibition. It was a very loud exhibition as well. And another work that dealt with the metaphor of hearing and the role of a listener is recently, and especially for Meeting Point 7, produced video by Egyptian artist Maha Mamoun, whom we mentioned today for a couple of times. The title of the video is Shooting Stars Remind Me of Eavesdropper. And I'm just using this as a little teaser because this is part also of the exhibition at Para Site, so hope you will come some of these days and see it as well. Inevitably, Maha's video also refers to the current political situation in Egypt, but in a quite oblique way. And another example of such kind of indirect political assessment comes from initiative Kaifeta, also presented in Zagreb, station of the Meeting Points exhibition, and it is an initiative started by Maha Mamoun and an artist from Jordan, Ala Yunis, and they started this series of booklets. Kaifeta literally means how to, so it actually borrows this idea of little toolkit booklets that's supposed to learn you how to fix or how to do something. And this one also used the metaphor of hearing and metaphor of ear, and it is actually composed of various little texts in forms of instructions that instruct you, for example, how to disappear, how to reappear, how to form a group, how to leave a group. So all those topics, when you read in between the lines, are also politically charged with all those open questions related to Arab Spring and Egyptian Revolution. Also, like last chapter in this little booklet is the so-called chapter on the sounds of the middle-class household. And especially the notion of the middle class was a very important and prominent aspect of the exhibition in Muhka, and we use it as a starting point also for the exhibition at Para Site, trying to also to deepen it up and to open it to various local perspectives. So this is like the first room in Muhka, and in this room we can say that this topic of the middle class kind of dominated. You can see here a video by Simone Fatal, a Syrian-born artist who grew up in Beirut, studied in Paris, and this is video she did in 1971. It is called Autoportrait, and actually it is the first video she did and very early example of video art in the Middle East. So she captures her kind of a self-portrait, offering various insight, memories, etc. but also indirectly it serves as a very interesting analysis of class relations in pre-Civil War Beirut. On the television here you can see Chronicle of a Summer, a cult documentary film done in 1961, also part of the exhibition in Para Site. It was done by Jean Rouch, a filmmaker and anthropologist, and Edgar Morin, a sociologist. And you probably know the film, but for those who are maybe not familiar with it, just to say that in '61, it was the first example of cinema verite film. They made an experiment with various members of working class, and they started with the question, are you happy? But also this seemingly petit bourgeois question of a personal happiness, it opens up a number of topical subjects such as the racial issue, also the situation in Algiers because of the French war in Algeria, and etc. So, what we try to do in Antwerp, in this room, and this somehow also served as a trigger for the idea for the setup here in Para Site, we try to mimic somehow this ambience of a living room, because there are also a number of works. This is Robert Filiu. Maybe to mention that in all our exhibitions we always combine contemporary and historical positions, while not trying to historicize them, but trying to find what is still relevant and contemporary in this resonance with the current context. And for Antwerp exhibition, many historical works were actually part of their collection, because we also exhibited many works from the collection. Robert Filiu, a French artist, member of Fluxus movement, and this is his work called Galerie Légitime from 69 to 70. So he was doing a kind of a personal traveling exhibition using his head and putting different artworks in the head and going around the city of Paris. And these heads here actually indicate the locations where he exhibited his artworks in this legitimate or illegitimate gallery. So this question also for us opened up the topic of the commodification of critical, artistic or curatorial gesture. This is work by Sanja Ivejković, an artist whom we mentioned quite a few times today. So this work is called The Right One, Pearls of the Revolution. And again, she is using this kind of juxtaposition of two images. The main image, it borrows the style or the language of glossy ads from the magazines, but it actually, the images are featuring a real person, a sociologist and feminist, Jana Šarinić from Zagreb. The photos are not photoshopped, although she wears makeup and holds a pearl. And on her eye, there is a little photo of two young partisans, female partisans, performing partisan salute from World War II. In Yugoslavia, partisan movement was very prominent. And what is this person trying to do while holding the string of pearls? She's trying to match the right one. So she's actually testing different gestures in this pursuit of the right one. So it really opens up the question of what is revolutionary potential today, especially as we said before, the middle classness as a problem, as a contradiction, was also important for us as cultural workers and curators. And there is the sentence here saying, each intellectual participates in the revolting pursuit of prestige and cannot but feel pangs of conscience. It is work by Anatoly Osmolovsky, a Russian artist who was a member and one of the persons who established Radek in the 90s in Russia. And this is also part of Muka's collection. There are several sentences, and they run through the exhibition as a kind of a leitmotif, and each slogan is actually made with the dust collected in the museum. So another work also from Muka collection is Alice Kreischer's the greatest happiness principal party. So it is a puppet play, and the work was done in 2001. And the whole script, it tells a story of bank. It is a fictitious bank. It is called Austrian Credit Institute, and it all happens in 1931. So basically, the work actually tackles the Great Depression and the crisis of 28. And there are different characters, historical and also imaginary, and they're all establishing actually International Monetary Fund in this script. And for us it was important that we show this work as a background for the open up question of the crisis of capitalism. And it's interesting that the work was done in 2001. And especially important was that this work really serves as a very good metaphor that the crisis that happened in 2008 didn't pop out all of the sudden out of nowhere, but that this kind of restructuring of capitalism is actually inherent process. So we are slowly moving up to another room in Muhka, and Alice Crusher's work served as a nice link to connect the topic of contemporary Europe in crisis with a mirrored topic that actually dealt with the European colonial history, an obvious source of European former wealth. And in that sense, while we actually work on the exhibition for Antwerp, having in mind that Belgium and also Antwerp as a city was heavily involved in colonialism in Congo, it really served as a very important background. This is work by Raj Kamal Kalon, an artist who we also mentioned today. And what she's doing is she's using like imaginary from anthropological books or historical resources that are depicting various colonial figures. For example, these three ladies are taken from one of such books, and she does this juxtaposition that is actually combining very often weapons. Here you can see dynamite being attached to them, and she calls that as a kind of a visual recuperation of years of abuse of those images and people in history. This is Kashmiri woman, a typical kind of a dancer, feminine style of representation, being paired with a weapon, gun, and the gun is taken from an image from the newspapers of US soldier in Afghanistan. And this served as an opening up statement for the exhibition. Another series, Dević is Dead Body, a series of anatomic drawings done on US reports on status of prisoners and tortures in Afghanistan and Iraq. This is Paul Devray, one work from the collection. And what you can see in the background, kind of blurry, is work by Bruno Lagomarsino, Entre Mundos, Between the Worlds. And this particular world, this wallpaper, it sets the whole ambience and the atmosphere for the setup in Para Site gallery. Paul Devray, in 1982, he died, and in that year he made a series of photographs of the close-ups of his aging body. And this series we included because, as seen before, this dynamic between collective body that protests, that actually asks for a change, that is involved in violence, was also for us interesting to be put in a dialogue with the single body, with the question of our own also responsibility and physical presence in those processes. This is Bruno Lagomarsino. It shows, it shows just a couple of information about this. It shows a sailboat and an armed horseman as a kind of visual reference to colonization processes. This is an artist from a Murka collection, Rajan, and Rajan is an Indian artist who was closely related to the group of Kerala radical artists, Ready-Made Insanities. This is the title of this collage series that is obviously borrowing from Bringing War Back Home from Marta Rosler. This is Filipa Cesar, her work on Amical Cabral, the leader of revolutionary movement in Guinea-Bissau and Capo Verde, an archive related to it. Cartoonist and artist from South Africa, Anton Kahnemer. Anton Kahnemer is also participating in the exhibition at Para Site, and he's using this bold and ironic style to criticize racial issues from the colonial past, but also from present moment. Alphabet of Democracy, part of this series. And also he's visually referring to this tremendously politically incorrect cartoon Tintin in Congo. And we are now slowly moving to the end, and this is work by Romanian artist Mona Vatamanu and Florin Tudor. And also conceptually we are moving to the topic of the revolution. This is the work, this is an ongoing work. They started to work on it in 2007, called Appointment with History. And in the background are little paintings that are depicting various social struggles and protests all around the world, from Syrian protests to Genoa protests. And again, sound was very important, as this is actually a sound installation, because on the loudspeakers it was a sound of Communist Manifesto being read in German that actually dominated the whole space. Work by Adelita Husni Bey on the potential of radical education. Marwa Arsanias, artist from Beirut, who did a work on El Hilal magazine, a magazine from Egypt. It means a crescent. It was a Marxist left-wing magazine, and she also composed a library on revolutionary books. Iman Issa work, and also present.
Here tomorrow.
You can hear it tomorrow in Paradise. Para Site, sorry. Para Site.
You see how well they're treating us?
Exactly. And this is a film by Keanu Sherari, also mentioned before by mistake. Newborns, also work that was done in 1979, at a moment when Iranian revolution still was resonating with emancipatory potentials. And this film is available on WHW, and we recommend you to watch it later on. And to end up this virtual walk through the exhibition, I will show two works by Robert Filiu. And both works were done in 1969, and they somehow capture very well what we try to do with the exhibition. On one hand, to deal with the dynamic of individual and collective body, of hopes and disappointments of revolutionary movements, as a call to arms, but also without judgment and with some humor. So Optimist Box contains a pavement stone that was being thrown during the student demonstrations in Paris in '69. And the text here, it says, not to be thrown anymore. So we use it as a kind of a very well description of this current moment of impasse of the revolutions in Arab world, but also beyond, and also capturing this moment of sadness. And as a last work we will show today, another work by Robert Filiu. It is actually a cover of his booklet. It says, "Here it is a spring, and I'm the only sad one." So again, this moment of disillusionment and sadness, and yet having another spring before us. In Europe, the question of revolutionary subject and revolutionary potential remains yet to be seen and discussed. And what we try to do with the exhibition in Para Site, we try to deepen up the investigation of the role of the middle class and to offer some new perspectives on it, as we feel, also us belonging to this class, a lot of these unanswered questions will also rely on what we will do or what we will not do. Thank you.
Questions, comments?
We were long, so if you also just want drinks, that's also fine.
Thank you for that. Just looking at the images and hearing more about Tipping Point, I was thinking and reflecting on the earlier part of when you were talking about your situation home, Croatia, and actually sort of the creation of nations. The Indian historian Raj Kumar Guha talks about, you know, in his description of India, talking about axes of diversity, which he lists as language, religion, region, and axes of disparity, which to him are gender, class, caste. And one of the things I think your exhibition and what we're seeing is that those two things are sort of merging, where things like religion become also around disparity, and class then also sort of, you know, merges into diversity. And one of the things that I'm just thinking through this is as the sort of the economic global becomes grows across nations, in a way the meeting point exhibition as you've structured it is trying to do something similar. And I wonder, I mean, it's more of a comment, I think, than a question, because I haven't formulated it, but I was just sort of struck by these, the echoes that also then play with time. So I think the idea that you go back into history and look at historical works, as I think those sort of historical moments are echoing again in a different way.
You put it much better than us. Yes, I mean, I would completely agree that this was the attempt, and I think that, you know, what happened when we were invited, as we tried to say a little bit, is we were also really kind of, you know, struck with this self-doubt, when in one way, you know, things that are happening, you want to support them, and then immediately as you move on, you're kind of, you know, struck with the doubts on all, you know, kind of possible topics that you mentioned, because we only saw, you know, kind of solidarity happening and at one moment and really erasing divisions, but as soon as the moment of intensity was gone, the divisions were really here on all possible levels. And in a way, it was kind of not easy not to do, I would say, one, you know, like gloomy or even depressed exhibition. So in a way, we thought that what we could try to do is find empowerment in different experiments, in different get-togethers, in different, you know, kind of historical experiences. And this is why these resonances that you mentioned were really important. So in a way to try to open it up, both in terms of, you know, kind of times and geographies, and finding ways where in totally different moments, somehow these divisions could be crossed, even though if maybe it was happening for a very brief moment, or if it happened for a couple of decades. And this was something which we hoped that would happen while we were kind of, you know, seeing any of the exhibitions, that this sense of delusionment was here as kind of part of the reality, but the demand, you know, to still kind of stay awake and in a way connect to this, even in the way if you get, I don't know, like sad or angry or starts you thinking, that this would be something you would carry on in the attempt to try to imagine the next step and also be aware of your own responsibility. So I would say that this was somehow, hopefully, the thing that you would get out of with the exhibition.
And I think also in terms of creating like the global exhibition that is looking into global issues, also it had to do with the question of how do you reflect on the things that are happening in this very moment and that are politically very traumatic or very engaging. And many of the artists and the practitioners working in the Middle East, when they started, actually were very reluctant to create any works that would reflect on what's going on. So we said, okay, let's see how it reverberates on a wider scale than really going to immediate reflection of the reality that is happening there. That would be maybe documentaristic in a way. Yeah, sure.
Thank you for the talk. It was very interesting. I'm curious, you mentioned briefly in the beginning that the whole framework was initiated by some organization that promote Arab art. And yeah, which sounds at least something, there's something very nationalistic about it. So I'm wondering how you dealt with that, and also if you would do the same if it was like an organization that promotes Slavic art or Russian art or different kinds.
It would, you mean, it would be Slavic art, only Slavic art, pan-Slavic art.
Yeah, exactly, like this kind of organization.
I think it really depends, all of these things really depend on the context of the current political moment and what's going on in the, I mean, I would say for Young Arab Theatre Fund, they much more try to create the links within the Arab art scene than to promote it internationally. So as Sabina mentioned, when they started working together, because of the political system is happening throughout the Arab region, you couldn't really see things in Lebanon that were happening in Egypt, or you couldn't really see things in Tunisia. It was hard. And we had a lot of these programs also for, let's say, art from the Balkans, where you had to have like a, I don't know, a European foundation trying to organize a program where you could collaborate with people from Serbia or Bosnia, where actually people that were in the same state only a few years ago. And you have to try to maintain a critical distance, but also use it as a tool, because it actually makes sense where you manage to work with people on one-to-one level and and to meet them and to talk to them, rather than to be able to see art from the region always mediated through Western institutions, and only to be able to see people from the neighboring countries. For Balkans, the case would be usually Vienna, as the closest Western center and kind of a guardian of the Eastern European art scene. So in a way, you try to develop systems that counter this type of regional representation and use it as a tool at the same time as much as you can. And I would say this is the case, how you work with the structures of the Young Arab Theatre Fund and all the other structures.
I just wanted to add that there is something very interesting in the recent artistic production actually that is happening in the Middle East, in so-called Arab world, which is of course completely ghost term, and we can be very critical about it. Very often, and this is something that's also happened during the war in ex-Yugoslavia, especially in the international context. Artists are to be expected to serve as reporters, like to give us a report on what is going on in Yugoslavia, what is going on Tahrir Square. And in that sense, it's really interesting that a very kind of strong counter approach is being developed. Like, for example, the film by Tony Chakar that was presented here in Para Site, actually, speaking Maltese, said, what is the fundamental difference between one village in Europe and one village in Syria? And actually, it really speaks the truth, because one village in Europe can very easily become a village in Syria in a sense of the social movement. And also a number of works that are presented within the meeting point 7 that are recently produced from Middle East are really using this kind of a metaphorical way to be political, and they strongly oppose the role Western gains very often impose on them. Like, why don't you try to explain what's going on in Egypt now with your artwork? So in that sense, I think this is a very, very strong and prominent counter strategy to oppose those kind of things.
And one thing also, I mean, also for us, this is why particularly working with Para Site in Hong Kong and working with Victoria Art Foundation in Moscow was really important, to try to reverse, especially in the afterday of what was going on in the Middle East and this big hype of the Middle East that was happening at one point, this Middle East being represented in Europe. And also, we often get invited to do exhibitions of Croatian artists or about Balkans artists, and we always say, okay, but we never do it in the end. We do something else. So this also is starting from the Middle East, but it's definitely not a typical Middle Eastern exhibition.
There was another question.
Yes.
Thanks for the presentation. One question and one comment, and maybe they are linked. The first one, the first slide and the last slide, what's really interesting is that this in those you use 3 languages, and for me, I mean, the way I read it is very clear that the revolution spirit is basically also moving. It's never ending, it's always moving from one place to another. And then my question would be, I mean, the location becoming important, and the idea of meeting point is also located base. The question would be where is where, because we have the what, how, and who, but where is where could be an interesting question. And then the comments that I would have that could be interesting is you talk about resonance and moving from one place to another, and that as a form of resonance, which I think it's very interesting. But I was wondering if instead of resonance, what would be more interesting, and it seems to me that's what you presented today is more about the trajectory than the resonance itself. So.
I think, yes, you're right. Trajectory is also a very, very nice term to describe it. In terms of where, I think always we start from where as Eastern Europe. And often people are, during our lectures or during our exhibition and projects, but there is one comment where they say that we are a big ex-Yugoslavia obsessed. We are. I mean, we got together at the end of the 90s, which was the end of the Civil War and the really xenophobic and nationalistic years in Croatia. And we got together along our political affiliations and lines as much as we did in terms of artistic tastes, which completely overlap. So we always we start all our reflections and all our projects from this point in space, which is so-called transition of Eastern European post-socialist society from socialism to, I don't know, developed capitalism or late capitalism. And we try to base our projects there. And this is why also we start the meeting points in Zagreb. And this is why we always bring this question of Eastern Europe or Europe becoming one into play.
But as I mentioned, I think, the question of where in meeting points is, of course, shaped by our experience and our starting point. But it really tried to almost, answer everywhere, because this is what we felt. We felt that this moment of international solidarity with, what was happening and everything that, maybe should have been connected much more in terms of, the protests happening in different parts of the world connected to the capitalist system and so on, is something which was very important for us to somehow, bring in front and and insist on. Because of course that the questions of Middle East are never the questions of Middle East, but of kind of wider, kind of geopolitical games of the big players. So in a way, we also tried to insist that we are aware that, this war is happening in different kind of, positions of power, and that it's also on us to try to insist that we can contribute to this war being distributed and coming together in a way.
So, thank you all for the talk.
Thank you for your patience.
Any last questions? None? Okay. Just a, I actually don't need this. But so everybody's welcome. We have a bit of dinner going on at Vives tonight. So if you guys want to come around for a bit of food for dinner, you're all welcome. And just remember, I did openings tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.